My name is Matt Spence. I'm a director of the Truman National Security Project. One thing you talked about is the importance of, with our interdependence, of greater need for foreign aid and greater need for caring about the well-being and security of people outside the United States. And one thing that we've talked about earlier at this festival was how we can make the green revolution, the green movement, more red, white, and blue. And I guess my question is, how do we do the same with development policy and foreign aid? That despite the war on terror and despite these problems that cross borders, American support for foreign aid is still very small, which is only one tool, of course, of what we need to do. And American foreign aid is still less than 1% of what our foreign budget is. So as we're talking about now, is there might be this new opportunity to really make these foreign aid and development questions a real question of not just moral importance, but real national security for Americans. What do you say to the American people to actually care about this in a way that we just haven't before?
Well, first of all, let me say, under President Bush, we have increased foreign assistance in AIDS. We're spending like $5.5 billion a year now on AIDS and malaria and other things like that. That's a lot more than we were spending. Our foreign aid budget is still miserably low. But the main reason is not that the American people wouldn't support an adequate foreign assistance budget. It's that they are still under the illusion that we're spending more money than we are. Like if you ask the average American, well, how much should we spend in foreign assistance? They'd say, between 3 and 5% of the budget. Well, what are we spending? 10 or 15%?
1%.
And the truth is, as you just pointed out, we're spending about 1%. So a lot of this is simply education. I think we need to talk more about it, and we need to get the facts about what we're spending. Second thing we need to do is something I've really tried hard to do in this book, is to show skeptics that you can spend money effectively. You can actually get a very high rate of return on your investment in advancing healthcare and education and clean water and sanitation and economic development. I mean, whenever I give a speech, for example, today, I always say that when Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for his microcredit movement, a goal for which I proudly campaigned for 14 years, he got lots of publicity on the fact that 97% of his borrowers were women and the repayment rate was 98.5%. But from the point of view of a skeptic, the most important statistic is this: 58% of the borrowers of the Grameen Bank used their loans to lift themselves above the international poverty line. 58%. That's a staggering statistic. Bangladesh today has a per capita income of just under $500. It was $340 when he started. Today, last year, Bangladesh grew by over 6% in spite of the fact that it was involved in a horrible political turmoil that virtually paralyzed the country because they have a decentralized, vibrant entrepreneurial sector. So the second thing we have to do is say, we can do this. We can tell people that we can get kids in school for not very much money. And we can show them that. We can show them how this health program works. So I think that's the second thing. Third thing I have to say is we can't have either party switch their position on it depending on whether the other person's in the White House. For example, I was delighted that the Republican Congress would give President Bush more money than they'd ever have thought of giving me to fight AIDS, because it meant people were going to live. But if we get a Democratic president next time, will the same people vote against foreign aid when we know that it builds more partners? But if you look at the Millennium Development Program of the Bush administration and the healthcare program, I think they're positive. It's just that we need to do more. And the third thing I think would help is if people understood the relative cost. Let's suppose we decide to really go out there on a limb and fund America's share of meeting the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, with only the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development countries, the richest country in the world, is paying. So if we paid our fair share of that, it'd be about a little over a third, give or take $40 billion a year. That sounds like a hell of a lot of money. The government's budget this year is $2.8 trillion. We spent over $100 billion in Afghanistan, over $500 billion in Iraq. It's essentially about 5 months in Iraq, which affects 25 million people to affect 2 billion. So these are the things we need to put out. But basically, the public is already there. All you got to do is tell them the truth. If the leaders will do the right thing, the public will support them. What the public will not do now is vote against you for doing the wrong thing, because it's not high on their hierarchy of values and because their information base is inadequate. So you should try to get their information base fixed, but recognize in the end, in the near term, it's just going to depend on whether the leaders want to do the right thing or not.
We have time for only one more question, and okay. But I was told we had to end with, oh, Jim, you're sitting down? Okay. Yes. Yes, please, come on ahead.
You may recall last year someone wanted to talk to you about becoming the Middle East envoy. Now that Tony Blair has that job, what do you suggest should be his priorities? And secondly, given his involvement in Iraq, do you think that he still has credibility there with the parties?
Well, first, let me answer your first question first. I believe that what his job is will be defined largely by how much the quartet, and especially the United States, but also the others, the EU and the Russians and the UN, how much they let him do, if anything, beyond his stated mandate, which is to promote economic opportunity. Isn't that right? Promote economic opportunity among the Palestinians. What needs doing is to decide whether there is any way in the wide world to find a nonviolent reconciliation between the Palestinian factions which will enable them to make sufficient commitments, at least privately, to justify private talks with the Israelis, like those which led to the original agreements that we signed on the White House lawn in '93. Does he have the credibility to do that? He would if all those governments supported him, because the Israelis trust him, because he defended them after Lebanon, which infuriated a lot of the other actors in the area, especially after he supported the policy in Iraq. But you got to understand, you can't help the Palestinians unless the Israelis think you care whether they live or die. I mean, the reason we could make progress for 7 years is even the conservative Israelis who disagree with my policy knew that I really cared whether they lived or died. They knew it mattered to me. And I think Tony Blair's been very forthright in being for a Palestinian state, very forthright in having it as contiguous as possible, as much of the West Bank as possible. And look, I feel the same way. I told him, I saw him right when I was in London last week, right after the day after he left office. And I said, I feel the same way about you I did about me. I said, you will probably fail. All I know is when you're failing because you're trying, fewer people die. My view is that we should never define success in the Middle East based on whether there's a comprehensive peace on our watch, because that's up to them, not us. All I know is that whenever good people try, fewer people die. And as fewer people die, the possibilities of peace remain open more. So, and look, how crazy is this? The biggest story, the only thing that's pushed Iraq out of #1 in Middle East news is the epic battle between Hamas and the Fatah for the Fatah security headquarters, and 90 people die. Now, some of us in this room have been in that building. It ain't that big a deal. And I don't mean to be pejorative in my discussion of the Palestinians. I do not know any Palestinians. I've said this every time I come here. I'll tell you this again. I know a lot of Palestinians. I have never met a poor Palestinian in my life outside the territories. They're the #1 per capita income in Ecuador. They control the flower trade in Chile. Every Palestinian I know in America is a college professor or a millionaire. I have never met a poor Palestinian outside the territories. They are the most misgoverned, abused, misused people I have ever seen in all my born days. If the Palestinians would get together, make a deal with Israel, which they desperately want to do now because they're worried about Iran, and the Arabs want to help because they're worried about Iran, within 10 years, the whole locus of economic and political power in the Middle East would be in the hands of the Israelis and the Palestinians, because they would get so rich together, they would make a new Middle East of positive interdependence. That's what I think.
From your lips to God's ears.